Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're basically unlocking a cheat code in the world of photography. We're going to look at exactly how to create these high-end, stunningly cinematic portraits that literally look like they were shot on gear worth tens of thousands of dollars. And honestly, the best part? You're going to learn how to do this using the standard, everyday camera gear you probably already have sitting in your bag.
All right, let's just dive right in with a bit of a physics paradox, shall we? You know how it goes in photography. If you want a wide field of view to capture a whole scene, you grab a wide-angle lens, right? But that naturally gives you a really deep depth of field where everything is sharply in focus. Now, if you want that creamy, beautifully blurred background, you switch to a long telephoto lens, but suddenly your field of view is narrowed down to this tiny, tight little box. So, what if you want both? How do you get a massive wide-angle view but keep the incredibly shallow background of a telephoto lens? Well, it would require something crazy, like a 50mm f/0.5 lens. The catch? Physically building a lens like that is pretty much impossible. So, how do we cheat physics?
To figure that out, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the bokeh panorama illusion, then get into the gear and lens math. After that, we'll walk through the step-by-step process, look at some flash and vintage hacks, and finally, go over the pitfalls to avoid.
All right, part 1, the bokeh panorama illusion.
So what actually is the Brenizer method? Well, you'll often hear it called a bokeh panorama. Basically, it's a technique where you take the super narrow, highly blurred field of view from a telephoto lens, shoot a bunch of overlapping frames, and then digitally stitch them all together into one massive wide-angle portrait. You are literally building a wide-angle photo out of tiny telephoto puzzle pieces. Now, you might be wondering why go through all this trouble? Well, standard digital sensors are, relatively small. But when you stitch dozens of images together, you're artificially expanding your image area in post-production. You're essentially faking the massive, super expensive film negatives of old large-format cameras. The result? It gives your subject this incredible 3D pop, an extreme separation that literally makes them look like they're lifting right off the screen.
It's got a pretty cool backstory, too. Obviously, it mimics the old large-format film days, but the digital side of it started taking shape around 2007. That's when a photographer named Daniel Bokeh started sharing this digital stitching concept on some online forums. But it really caught fire in 2008 when wedding photographer Ryan Brenizer popularized it. Back then, he actually called the results Ryan's strange lenses before the community officially dubbed it the Brenizer Method. It's just a really awesome example of community-driven innovation.
Okay, moving on to section 2, gear and lens math.
Now, I promise, the math here is super simple. Photographer Philip Reeve did this great analysis, and he came up with the blur potential quotient. It's exactly what it sounds like. You just take your lens's focal length and divide it by its maximum aperture. The bigger that resulting number is, the more absolute magic you get in your final bokeh panorama.
Let's actually look at those numbers in action. Take a massive 200mm f1.8 lens. That gives you a blur quotient of 111. I mean, that is the holy grail for that 3D separation effect. Compare that to your trusty 85mm f1.4, which sits at a 61. Still great, for sure, but definitely different. The catch here? Shooting with that 200mm means you're going to be taking a lot more individual photos to cover the exact same scene. So it's a trade-off, right? More shooting time and effort, but a seriously mind-blowing 3D result.
Which brings us to section 3, the step-by-step process.
All right, if there's one thing you take away from this, it's this. Automation is your absolute worst enemy here. If your camera is making decisions for you, the whole illusion falls apart. Step 1. You have to be in fully manual exposure and manual white balance. Step 2. Grab focus on your subject's eyes and then lock it. Switch right over to manual focus so it absolutely doesn't budge. And step 3. You're going to shoot a very systematic overlapping grid. If your exposure or focus shifts even a tiny bit between frames, your stitching software is going to throw a fit and fail.
When you're out there actually shooting this grid, I want you to think about reading a book. You start at the top left of the scene, scan across to the right, drop down a line, and scan back across. And this is vital. Make sure every single frame overlaps the last one by like 30 to 50%. Do not just randomly snap photos to fill in the gaps. I'm telling you, random shooting confuses the software, and you'll end up with these messy, fragmented edges that you just can't use.
Okay, so you've shot the grid. Now it's time for the digital darkroom.
First up, apply your color and exposure edits to just one single raw file, and then sync those exact identical edits across your entire batch. Next, export them all as medium-sized JPEGs. Seriously, if you try to stitch 40 high-res raw files together, your computer might actually melt. Feed those JPEGs into Photoshop, Affinity Photo, or Microsoft Ice to stitch them up. Finally, crop away those jagged, uneven borders, and boom, your impossible photo is complete.
Let's level it up. Section 4, Flash and Vintage Hacks. So, adding off-camera flash to a Brenizer portrait, it looks unbelievable. It gives you this super high-end commercial fashion vibe. Photographer Alex Silva detailed a really great workflow for this. Because you're zoomed in so close, you might actually need to capture your subject across 4 overlapping frames instead of just 1. You absolutely have to set your flash to completely manual power, say quarter power, so the light output never ever varies. Slap some color gels on there to match the ambient sunset light, and again, make sure every other setting on your camera stays totally locked. Now, we mentioned those crazy expensive 200mm f1.8 lenses earlier. Well, our source material has an incredible budget hack for this. Old, vintage projector lenses. Things like the Carl Zeiss Gina Vision R series, they offer these insane blur quotients for just a tiny fraction of the cost of modern glass. Yeah, they're heavy, they're manual, and they actually don't even have an aperture diaphragm, so you're forced to shoot wide open all the time. But hey, since this whole method relies on shooting wide open anyway, these cheap vintage lenses are pretty much a match made in heaven.
Almost done. Section 5, Pitfalls to Avoid.
Okay, definitely keep this checklist handy. The absolute most common mistakes? Not overlapping your shots enough. That'll literally leave holes in your final image. Then there's subject movement. If the wind blows their hair or they shift their feet, the whole stitch fails. Also, watch out for framing your subject way too close to the edge of your grid. You risk chopping them off when you crop the jagged borders at the end. And finally, leaving any setting on auto. I can't say it enough. A completely still subject and a super disciplined overlapping pattern are just non-negotiable. There is one really technical pitfall to look out for too, and that's optical vignetting, or what people call cat's eyes. Basically, some lenses, even really fast ones, will kind of squish or chop off the circular bokeh balls near the extreme edges of the frame. When you try to stitch dozens of those frames together, the software panics. It just can't seamlessly blend those chaotic, chopped-up background shapes. So getting to know the quirky characteristics of your specific lens is super important here. As we wrap up all this technical stuff, I really wanted to share this fantastic, uplifting quote from Alex Silva that was in our source material. He says, "Stay safe, keep learning, and keep creating." I love that. The Brenizer method definitely takes practice, patience, and yeah, a good bit of trial and error, but man, the results are just so incredibly rewarding. Which brings us to our final thought for today. You absolutely do not need a $10,000 medium format digital camera to bend the rules of physics. You've got the tools right now, you know the math, and you've got the step-by-step workflow. So my question to you is, what impossible reality are you going to create with the gear sitting in your bag right now? Thanks so much for hanging out with me on The Explainer today, and happy shooting!